Oh, where's my thing? Oh, there it is.
Oh.
Cake. Cake. What's up, everybody? Welcome back.
We just have to have one that just does this now.
Oh, just a
like a samurai sword, you know,
a head slice, the guillotine intro. Welcome everybody back to your favorite pandemic podcast. That's right, Pencil to Pencil, the live podcast where you get to interact with your favorite comic book illustrator, animator, designer, creative, hoi polloi people about town. Brought to you every Wednesday at 8 p.m. EST by the ambassador of Philadelphia, Jamar Nicholas, along with my best bud and Master Chief of Comic Books, Mike Manley. How are you, Mike Manley?
I'm fine. I think of myself as the master troglodyte, the master cave dweller who leaves my house about once, maybe twice a month at the most.
Yeah, I know that you've been kind of hunkering down lately, Mike. You're not going outside into the sun.
I go for a walk, but I do not visit very often the village of the other humans.
Oh, the huge manatee. That's one of my favorite jokes.
I don't. I did today, which was a little scary. So
yeah. And I guess some of that also comes with the area you're in too, right? But one thing I do like about Mike that you do when you leave the house and do your walks is you'll post really cool photos of the neighborhood on your Facebook.
Yeah. I like to take photos. Probably got that from my dad, who's an excellent photographer. Yeah, I do like to take a lot of photos, and I even had a couple of. I used to have a Tumblr. I don't know if anybody ever goes to Tumblr anymore, but
no, since they got rid of porn, nobody goes.
Right? Yeah. So I wasn't putting any porn on there, but I had was it 10,000 incidents of beauty a day? Because I always think if you go around walking, you're just paying attention. You say, "Oh, that looks cool. That looks cool. Look at the sun hitting that, or look at the angle on that, or look at there's something that's around you. If you train your eye to look for it, you can find a lot of beautiful things every day."
So, Mike, let me ask you a question. This might turn into us talking to Ron. Now that everything's so digital and everything is, who has a point and click camera anymore? You take all your photos with a phone. Do you feel the need to still take reference photos or just have a bank of images that you have stored somewhere on your camera roll?
Well, I'm always taking pictures. Like I might take a picture of, let's say I was doing a gesture or something, I'll take a picture. I take pictures of, sometimes I'll take a reference of I have the Fison dolls,
Whoa, we need some draws, my man.
So, you might get an angle, you get the light on the character, and that helps. So I do take, I wish I had more time.
Yeah.
Like the strip guys, the classic strip guys I always talk about, they would take photo reference. I don't have the models. I don't have somebody here to do it. I don't have the time to do it. So, but I do take photos all the time.
Yeah.
As anybody who follows me on my Facebook, I don't really put it on my Instagram, but on my Facebook, I'm always taking pictures of my cat, like everybody. If I see something interesting when I walk around, but, it's great the iPhone, because and back in the day, if I had an iPhone, I would have taken. I took pictures and Xerox stuff when I worked with Williamson.
Yeah,
but I would have taken way more. But when you shoot 35, and then you got to go up and get it developed. And did the guy do a good job developing, or is it dodgy and you're not getting the contrast you want? Right. If you weren't doing all that yourself, it was just not as convenient.
Right. Yeah, people don't know about the photo mat in the parking lot of the strip mall. They don't know about that.
I remember that. I remember this, actually. I had a photography class in high school, and we learned to load the reels of film, the raw film. You go shoot stuff.
Yeah,
you learn to make the developer and the stop bath, and that whole process. And I can to this day remember very clearly the smell of all that.
Yeah, it's a very specific smell to darkroom fluids and all that.
And to kind of bring it around in a way, my dad has an enlarger and he has all that stuff. Now he's switched over himself to digital, and so he was looking to see if he could give away his material. He couldn't find anybody because the only people who do that now are considered to be fine artists. All commercial photography is all digital. So it's hard to find paper. It's harder to find chemicals. I mean, there used to be 20 places within an hour of me. You could go back in the day and get chemicals, paper, all your photographic stuff. They're almost, or get your camera repaired. They're almost all gone now. There's like a couple places in Chinatown, I think. Even like the spot up at 69th Street that I used to go to when I was still taking film. Yeah, they're gone.
Yeah. It's a whole new world.
Yeah. So,
well, everybody, welcome to the show. Let me give you some housekeeping tips. If you've never watched the show, because one thing that I love is that every time we have a new guest, a lot of the guests' fans, friends, and influencers come in on the slipstream right behind them. So if you've never seen the show before, let me explain what happens. So Mike and myself are going to interview our good buddy RON FRENZ. And you, yes, you, dear viewer, have a chance to interact with us. If you're watching us live, hello from Facebook, hello from YouTube. Feel free to...
Or if you're watching us dead. Or
if you're
down in a swimming pool,
if you're, as Bob would say, dead in a ditch, feel free to throw some comments into the chat or the reply.
Love us,
and I'll do my best to put it on. As you will find out, there's no guarantees I'm going to put you on the screen if it's adding value to our conversation.
No.
Well, if I did it like that, maybe it'd be more entertaining. No, I'm not going to pick you. But yeah, it's always lively. It's always exciting. And remember to please like, share, and subscribe. This is the only way we can make the channel grow is if you share, like, and make sure you're here every week. So thanks so much.
Unless we spend $1 million.
Our good buddy, the notorious JRD, says, I'm stumped for questions that aren't. Remember that was awesome. Remember the old Chris Farley bit from Saturday Night Live? Well, please figure something out because
look at your old comics. Just type in Wikipedia RON FRENZ. I mean, you're going to see like a million things you could ask questions about.
Right. And, we were talking already in the green room, and there's a lot of stuff we had to put in our pocket just so we didn't spoil it all in the back room. So we have lots to talk about. So I'm very excited to bring on our guest for the evening. Acclaimed comic book illustrator RON FRENZ is here. And Ron, I don't know if he'll be happy to hear this or not, is when I put up the signpost for this episode a couple of days ago, people were like, wow emoji. We don't get a lot of wow emojis around here. So I think in 2021 currency, that means a lot, Mike Manley. So I'm excited. See, there you go. Ooh, RON FRENZ.
Well, pulse pounding RON FRENZ.
Pulse, that's right. I'm going to tattoo that on my stomach. Ooh, RON FRENZ.
Pulse pounding, and then you're going to make it go like.
All right. Oh, before we bring Ron in, I have to give a shout out to our sponsors. You see the John up there representing Philly very, very well. You know the John. Our good buddies at Graphics League who create Clip Studio Paint are our first sponsors in good standing. Also, our good buddy John Morrow over at Tomorrow's Publishing, who is the publisher of Draw Magazine, your favorite creative magazine, is our second publisher. Please go check out both of these fine establishments. You'll get your money's worth. Mike, I'm really excited to bring Ron in. I'm sure I might just be the fly on the wall tonight because I'm sure you guys have a lot to cover and talk about. But I would love to talk about kind of like the origin story of Ron, where he came from, where he's going, and I'm sure we'll have lots of great questions.
What kind of rays formed him? Gamma rays? Or cosmic rays?
Powerful. That's right. So, all right, without further ado, RON FRENZ, welcome to the stream. Hello.
Hi, guys.
Oh, I forgot to do my thing. All right, hold on. Sorry. RON FRENZ. Okay. There you go. I keep forgetting to do that. Sorry about that. Hey, welcome. Thanks for coming on, Ron. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm sure a lot of those wows you were getting were that guy's still alive. Because everybody assumed. I mean, I was 80s and 90s and 2000s, but everybody assumed I was like older. They always put me more in like Sal Buscema's age and everything. Thought I was a second career guy or something. Even some of the editors I worked for were shocked when they met me because they assumed I was older. So that may well be the case. In fact, from your conversation about cameras and everything, I figure we'll talk about rotary phones and I don't know.
Phone books, the actual phone book.
Having to get up and walk across the room to change the TV set, all kinds of interesting.
I still changed mine with a pair of pliers.
That's right.
Good you go.
That's fantastic. It's funny how so many things are just disappeared so quickly and are just out of the public consciousness. Like thinking about phone booths. Like, when's the last time you saw a actual phone booth, or at least one on a wall somewhere?
None of them are working anymore. No.
Right.
Or like your TV doesn't actually turn to snow like it used to do, it just goes blue. It's like
the national anthem and the flags waving at 2 a.m.
Yeah.
Goes to bed.
I was telling some young people I work at a college as my day gig, and I have a lot of work study, and we talk about old stuff, and it's always miraculous how young they are and how old I keep getting. But we talked about, I said, have you guys ever seen Poltergeist, that 80s movie? And they're like, no, I have no idea what you're talking about. I said, well, go and watch that. And they came back and they were like, we don't get it. Like, well, what don't you get? Well, the television just turned to static. What happened to the signal? I was like, well, TV used to go off after a certain time of night, like 3 o'clock. There was no more television. So just that component alone threw them out of the whole movie because the technology is so advanced now.
Advanced, yeah. 24-hour TV. Oh,
yeah. Nothing but like infomercials after midnight,
Exactly.
That's right. So there's a couple of questions already, Ron, and I like to go in a linear order, but people are just screaming out stuff, and maybe we'll just jump right in feet first. How's that sound?
That'll work. Either way, I'm back to telling my origin story, but I'll do it again if you want me to.
All right, we'll get back to that. So one of our day ones, Eternity Forever, says, Ron, please tell us about the creation of Heroes Union.
Oh, wow, that's like brand new stuff. That makes me feel like I'm vital and still ticking.
That's right.
Actually, it's almost completely a brainchild of the publisher and creator, Darren Henry. These are characters that he's been living with for quite a while now. I have designed most of them with him, and it's been a lot of fun. It's been a great little experiment because he'll send me all this disparate reference via email, and it'll be like, can you do something with this helmet and maybe these boots and this kind of look? I'm looking for something kind of like this. And, can you basically homogenize, add it all together, see if you can come up with a commonality and try to make it look like it all belongs together, that kind of thing. And all of the characters we've created have been pretty much created that way. And when it works, it's great. Even when it doesn't work, it's a neat little experiment, and sometimes it doesn't work. But that would be a great question for Darren more than me. But putting together the book, and of course we were test marketing Blue Baron and several of the solo titles for quite a while for the last few years in Central PA and in smaller comic shops and everything. But we are now finally released through Diamond, and we launched with the brand new Heroes Union book. And it's going to be an ongoing series. I'm working on the second issue now, along with an illustrator named, for God's sakes, Chris Nye. And he's doing fantastic work. I'm just going to do thumbnails, and he's going to do pencils and inks. And I'm going to be still penciling the Blue Baron solo book. And it's been a lot of fun. It's when I've been approached by a lot of people. I was my joking career title now is I am a consigliere of dreams. People call me. They always wanted to publish comic books, and it's like, well, you know something about that, right? Would you like to work with me on these things?
Yeah.
So, and Darren was somebody, one, who had a much firmer idea. I mean, he's been a professional writer for years for television.
Yeah.
So he had a much firmer idea of what he was asking about. And two, he wanted to do, he's a child of 70s Marvel. Right. So he actually contacted Sal Buscema to ask if Sal would be interested in penciling and inking. Sal and I were either just wrapping up or had just wrapped up a run on Spider-Girl. And Sal had pretty much retired from penciling. He didn't really want to deal with the blank page anymore. So he recommended me. Darren claims he knew me from Spider-Girl. I don't know how true that is. But we ended up talking, and it's been a terrific creative relationship. I've been enjoying it quite a bit. And it's definitely what he's interested in doing is what's in my wheelhouse. I'm not really looking to get outside the box at this point in my career. I would, if I could do superheroes until they throw dirt on me, I'd be fine. And that's what he's interested in doing is, fairly straightforward, well-written, modern voiced superheroes with feet of clay and, exciting adventures, all ages adventures. And I'm really game for that. I'm up for that. So it's been a lot of fun. And the initial response from the test marketing, all the response was good. All of the reviews I'm seeing online are all terrific. What that means for sales these days, I have managed to stay so far away from the business aspect of this business my entire career that I have no idea what makes a success and what doesn't and everything. So I just kind of sit back and let people tell me if they need another issue, that kind of thing.
I love it. Thank you. Thanks, Eternity. And JRD also adds, I do like that the cover to HU has that classic heads in the corner box iconography.
Yeah, that was something Darren really wanted to capture. He, again, being a child of the 70s and 80s, he wanted to do the John Byrne headshots type of thing. And, we've done that for almost all of the characters because he also runs a glossary in the back of the books that deals with the fact that a lot of the character names are based on business terms, which is something that he decided that I thought was, apropos of nothing. I just think that's kind of neat. You have any thought process to that at all. They're all somehow tied into business terms, which I find really fascinating. I mean, not in any real way. I mean, the character bank is more like a bank, a river bank, than a money bank. That kind of thing. So he definitely just takes the name and runs in that direction he feels appropriate at the moment.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And it must be fun to work with Sal, because you worked with him
always
over the years, and he's in his mid 80s right now. I think
he's getting there. I think he's like 83, something like that.
Yeah. So he still loves what he's doing, which is great.
He's still doing incredible work. He has slowed down a little bit. He's not in. He just doesn't have the. If he's ready to retire any moment now, then nobody has earned it more than Sal. I've been saying for years, Sal, if we all have a finite number of pages in us, okay, let's say we all have a finite number of pages. Nobody is going to hit that number before Sal Buscema. And if when he's done, he's done, and with my blessing, that kind of thing. I love working with the guy. He's the best, and he legitimizes everything he touches. So I also feel that a lot of my professional legitimacy has come from working with Sal for the last several years. So I'll take it.
What would you say, when you work with people like that, like if you work with Sinnott or Palmer or Sal, I mean, guys have really been around. What would you say? Do you learn something from each one of those guys you partner with?
I do. Hopefully. I mean, hopefully you're learning from everybody you work with. positive and negative.
Mhm.
But I've been lucky enough to work with all three of those gentlemen, and they're all in education. I mean, they're all in education. When I started working at Marvel, I was working with Tom Palmer early enough that I didn't even have a finishing style yet. Very early on, they decided to use me as a layout guy more because they liked my storytelling, and they wanted me to just do layouts. And I was working with guys like Tom Palmer who could do complete finishes, and that was working fine for me because but it also, I was a little slower in developing a finishing style. I was just recently looking at the sample pages that got me my first gig at Marvel, and there is not a finishing style to be seen. I mean, there's a lot of pencil everywhere, and an inker would have had a hell of a time with those pages. They would have had to have gone to a finisher. They would have had to have gone to somebody with a finishing style.
I find that to be sort of interesting because people who submit samples usually choke up on the bat, a little bit and like really finish everything when you're first showing samples, and then you hit the ground running, and then it's like fastballs over the plate your first several jobs. You know what I mean?
No, I hit at a time, 82, 83, where Marvel was expanding under Jim Shooter. Things were going whole hog, and they were looking for people who could tell a story. But I didn't really have a finishing style. My backgrounds weren't where they needed to be yet. So under a lot of other circumstances, I probably wouldn't have gotten hired. But I was lucky because somebody could see, well, he could tell a story. So let's get him off the bench. Let's use him as a storyteller, and let's pair him up with guys like Tom Palmer.
Which is the hardest job. I mean, the hardest job in comics is taking a plot or abstract thing and making a story.
To think so.
Yeah.
I don't know how true that is, but it is. I mean, dealing with the blank page is the one thing that tends to defeat anybody who's not meant for this gig. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Eternitine asks, do you ever or have you ever gotten flack for having a finished Buscema style?
No, not from an editor or anything. I mean, there were editors that I was very aware were not interested in working with me because of my love of the traditional Marvel style. Right. I mean, I was told in no uncertain terms by one editor that I was never going to get work out of his office because he had a Rolodex of people that he felt he was hired at Marvel because of that Rolodex. And those were the people that were going to be getting work from him. Pat Olive has run into the same thing. That some editors take great pleasure in telling you
right. Yeah.
Until maybe someday that they're desperate and they need something turned around.
And I think the thing that people don't realize now is how different the business was and what you knew and what you could gain and the information that, now because of the internet, everybody knows everything all the time, 24 hours a day. As soon as something's popping, it's spread over everywhere. But in the late 70s or early 80s, if you were going around and showing your samples, you might be one editor who loves John Buscema.
Right.
And you're going to get a completely different set of feedback from that guy. And then you're going to meet another guy. Like I had editors who said, all the guys who work for EC look like Jack Davis, which was not true. I had other editors at Marvel said, the only reason John Buscema could get work is because he did the Avengers. But doing Conan was like not working in comics. Or working on a war book was like not working in comics. That's because it's not continuity, right? It's not part of the Marvel universe. So Joe Kubert, he sucks, man. Joe Sergeant rocks. That doesn't mean anything,
It's insane on the face of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
but when you're young.
Well, even in art school though, I used to enjoy studying styles, other people's styles. I mean, I went through a phase where I was doing a kind of a loose, like a Gene Colan thing. I was fascinated with the way Gene Colan moved the figures and was the kind of exaggeration he was able to get away with, in the same way that I've studied Kirby, in the same way that I've studied Ditko. And that's the other thing too, is there are plenty of people that, that think it's an insult to say I'm the third Buscema brother, which I take as a huge compliment. But there's also plenty of people that look at my stuff and they're all seeing different things. They're all bringing their own perceptions to it. There was at one point coming off my Kirby stuff on Thor, I showed a panel to a friend of mine, and to me, the panel looked every bit like a Buscema type of thing. And I said, what do you see when you look at that? And he goes, Kirby, Kirby, Kirby. Now Kirby is at the root of all of us,
Right, yeah.
Kirby was very much at the root of what Buscema was doing, especially in superhero titles. But, people can look at things. Anytime I post something on Facebook, it's hilarious to me. And Tom Morgan posts stuff. When you post stuff, Mike, the people come out of the woodwork and they're all here. They're all seeing something different. You do a Gene Colan Iron Man, and somebody says, "Boy, I see Don Heck all through that." And it's like and Gene Colan and Don Heck are about as far away from each other as
right. Yeah.
But it's funny to me how perception is 9/10 of what we're doing, and that's why if you have an editor that is narrow-minded or closed-minded or has a bone to pick with any given type of style or approach, that it can be a problem. But they're obviously at some point they're being hired for their point of view, much like a writer is, much like a penciler is, that kind of thing. So you deal with what you're the cards you're dealt.
It's also interesting because there was that time, like I remember my first trip up to Marvel, it was sort of disheartening to see that a lot of the stuff that I was really into, like Buscema, all the classic Marvel stuff, was kind of like, it's all John Byrne now. We want John Byrne. That was a big thing at the time, which Byrne, I was not. Yeah, and that was not my thing, right? That was not my thing. And then it's funny, as time went on, and the Image guys came in, and that kind of style took over. And then out of that came the anime, but people reading a lot of manga and watching anime. The industry was, for a long time, was really hostile to European stuff or the Japanese stuff, which now is like the default style for comics for 99% of people, young people reading. It's not what you and I grew up with. It's the stuff they grew up with, reading stuff from Tokyo Pop.
Sure. No, I can remember being a little depressed when I started seeing how to draw comics books in bookstores that were trying to show you this Image style, some version of an Image style that, it wasn't, because my only gripe with anything involving the Image style at all, because, I think there's room for everything. And as long as something's got fans and it sells books, who's going to argue with it?
Right.
But is that lines everywhere thing, I've looked at some of this stuff. I'm fascinated by different approaches and different styles. So I would look at this stuff for hours and I go, but how do they decide what these lines are? What are they?
Those little, I used to call them like the lemon seed lines you would see like on.
Right. Because it's not really a shadow. It's not really a lighting effect. So I never really could get my brain around what that was supposed to be. Because the one thing I will tell everybody is, when people talk to me, somebody just recently on my Facebook page said, whenever I draw squiggles on boots, they just look like squiggles. And I'm going to be like, because you need to know what the squiggles are supposed to be. Never put a line down that you don't know what its purpose is.
Right.
And but that was a case for these guys. There were at least a dozen of these guys out there that were putting down lines that I didn't know what their purpose was. Hopefully they did, because some guys did it really well and it looked like it was a complete illustration. Other guys would do it and it would just look like a lot of lines on the face too.
Yeah.
And then a lot of guys. Now I don't know if because we're roughly the same age and we worked roughly the same time, if you felt there was ever editorial pressure to kind of move in that direction, because Also, what a lot of people don't realize at the time is that editors made extra money at the end of the year, depending upon how their books perform. So if you put Todd McFarlane on every cover and it sells more books, it's more ching in that editor's pocket at the end of the year.
Yeah. The only time I felt that I wanted to adjust a little bit was when we launched Thunderstrike. We were coming off like 7 years on Thor, and sales were fine. Ralph Macchio was happy with our sales. He was happy with the work we were producing. So, we were engaging our readership. Everything was hunky-dory, neato fine on our newsstand sales. But with launching a new book was intimidating. And the only, I'm going to go ahead and just say what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
The only guy that really appealed to me, that I respected for what he was doing as far as storytelling, as far as the dynamics of the 90s, and was John Romita Jr.
Yeah.
And at that point, it was still early in his stuff because there was a cable miniseries that he did.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was laying out the first issue of Thunderstrike and the early issues of Thunderstrike, I had that cable miniseries on my desk. And the first issue was going to be double-sized, so we had some room to play with dynamics and a double-page splash, several splash pages. And I was doing some of that with the big main shot on a page and then some insert panels and stuff. None of which do I think is great storytelling. That doesn't really strike me as being the best way to tell a story, but it's what was very popular at the time. It was the closest I ever came to a concession towards the image dynamic, But that was as far as I was willing to go, is JR, because I was respecting what he was producing as an illustrator and as a storyteller. So I did my time studying that stuff. And if you look at the first issue of Thunderstrike, especially where we had extra pages to move around in, there's quite a bit of that. There's quite a bit of, a big figure and insert stuff with the actual storytelling and big dynamic stuff going on and 3-panel pages and double page splashes and things like that. But no, I never really felt any pressure. I mean, there was a time towards the end of our run on Thor that Al Milgrom, God love him, I noticed he was breaking up the blacks more with the cross hatching, and he was doing some of the, what always used to be the brush effect with the feathering, but the image guys had turned it into an ink effect with a squiggle line and then breaking up the blacks. I noticed he was starting to do that on Eric's Thor costume, which was mostly a black bodysuit. He was starting to break up the blacks a little bit more. And I said, Al, unless the editor's telling you to do that, don't worry about it. I'm fine. I think we're okay. I said, if that's a conversation you've had with Ralph and Ralph Macchio, and Ralph Macchio wants it, then fine. Then ignore what I'm saying because, he's the boss. But there was a little bit of that going on. But for the most part, if your books were selling, they left you alone,
Right.
And I was fortunate enough to be, working with DeFalco on runs that were selling solid, and so they left us alone. I mean, then even later on Spider-Girl, we were in our own little niche universe, and hardly anybody was paying attention to us. We had one editor who constantly reminded us that he had no idea why we were still being published. That was fun.
That's nice when you you just pull a 2 days in a row, no sleep to finish a job and send it in, and like, why is this even here in my office?
Yeah, I said whatever. It was one guy, but then we had a series of terrific editors. Nicole Wiley and Molly Laser were just fantastic, and Tom Brennan came on it towards the end and kind of helped us sail into port, and he was enthusiastic as well. But we did have a couple of people that we were so niche that even our editor went, yeah, whatever, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But it was fun to not have to worry about, because at that point there were all the tie-ins and all the big, summer events, And then the summer events would turn into the fall event, would turn into the spring event. It was just awful. And I was so happy we weren't a part of any of that.
Yeah.
Because
even one of the problems when I was working on the Batman stuff, which was you have to wait for another guy to draw something, so that then you could draw the thing, and then you draw your thing and send it a couple pages and send it up to the guy who's drawn the part after you, and so it's all this.
I'm there with you, man. I did my time on Superman. That was brutal. I have nothing but respect for the guys that were able to work on those books that way, because it broke me. It was really riding the dragon. It was really tough.
Yeah, and this is all pre-internet. Like now, you can send stuff immediately, put stuff on the server or whatever. But this is like also when they didn't want you to have somebody else's phone number. Don't call the inker. We'll call the inker. You shouldn't have that. You don't want you communicating. All communication must go through central command.
And now these days, there's talent coordinators and things like that. Mm-hmm. But these days, I mean, they almost expect that pencilers are going to have their own inker in their back pocket or something, and have somebody that they prefer to work with, and they seem to be fine with it. So the industry has changed since I was in the trenches. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And because people today, they're still at conventions, and even on my Facebook page, they'll ask me, what my advice is to get into the industry. And it's a whole different animal now, my friend. I don't know what to tell you. And even when I was a part of it, when I was still part of the big show, it was one of those things where you could show your stuff to one editor, and they may tell you that you don't have any chance of ever working in this industry, and you can gather up your stuff and walk 2 doors down and find an editor that loves your stuff and wants to use it. I mean, it's always been an incredibly subjective industry, which is good and bad. And it depends on what side of the table you're on that day. I mean, who's on the other side of it? Who's on the other side of the table? It's tough. It's tough.
Well, Ron, this might be a perfect time to jump into your origin story.
Okay.
All right. So, because everybody's always intrigued on how you found the door in the side of the mountain and got in.
What part of Pangea did you come from? Cosmic rays or gamma rays?
I mean, my story is probably the same as almost everybody that was working in the industry in my generation. Is I loved comics from day one. I've been drawing. I don't remember a time when I didn't draw, literally, and I've just always loved it. And from the time I was like 6 or 7 years old, if you asked me what I wanted to do, I wanted to grow up. I wanted to work for Marvel Comics, and I wanted to draw the Spider-Man. Mm-hmm. So once I discovered that cartoon and started reading the comic books and discovered Ramita and Ditko and everything, that was it.
You're on the right. Yeah.
I was very directed. Last 2 years of high school, I went to a Votech for commercial art. I was recognizing the fact that if I didn't get into comics, I still wanted to make a living drawing. So I was learning about other things. At the Votech, I won a half scholarship to the 2-year course of the Art Institute of Pittsburgh, and did that. And during those 2 years, really, kind of experimented and paid attention to all kinds of things that are dead industries now: fashion illustration, product illustration, all that kind of stuff. My God, I'm so old. We were cutting ruby lith and amber lith.
Oh yeah.
All kinds of crazy things that young people will never have to deal with. So, but when the time came, when I finally felt at all ready, I remember encountering Marie Severin at a convention, at a local comic convention. And I was showing her some samples, but I still didn't have any storytelling. But she felt, with just the single drawings I was showing her and the figure drawing I was showing her and all this, that I should go to Jim Shooter, who was also a guest, and I should get a plot, a sample plot, and produce some pages. And I didn't. I chickened out. I didn't feel like I was ready at all. And when I finally did put together some sample pages, the ones I was talking about that had no finishing style and barely any background. Jim Shooter was doing a shop appearance in town here in Pittsburgh. It's his hometown too, and he was doing a local shop appearance. So I had some terrific friends from art school that said, we brought our samples. We're going to show them our samples. If you don't show them your samples, we're going to hurt you. So I went, okay, and I showed him my samples, and it went. He was very gracious, and it went very well. And he told me to Xerox that stuff and send him copies. And he said something to me like, and I guess you and I will be talking, and I went, holy crap, okay. So I went home, thought, wow, that was neat. I mailed the stuff in, and then didn't hear anything for like a year. In the meantime, I got a job at a local animation house. We did local and regional animation spots. And about a year after that meeting with Shooter, I got a call from my mom. I was still living at home with my folks, working at the animation studio, and she called the studio to say somebody named Al Milgram just called from Marvel and said that they'd like to talk to you about some work. And they left this number. So I called the number. Al Milgram answered the phone. He handed the phone to Louise Jones, and they gave me my first case art fill-in. And I stayed working at the animation studio for the next couple of years, up through when they offered me Spider-Man work.
Regular work.
Well, see, that was the thing. When I was offered Spider-Man, it was for 6 months. JR was going to go do X-Men and get X-Men on schedule, and then he was going to come back and do Spider-Man and X-Men. So they needed somebody to do Spider-Man for like 6 months. But I figured, offering Spider-Man, so you're doing okay. Maybe it's time to just go full time with Marvel, and it's never gonna feel safer than it is right now.
So what years were these? I mean, like, when were you showing your stuff to Shooter the first time? Or when did you chicken out to show him the first time?
Wow, I don't know. I started working at Marvel towards the end of '82. I think the first KSR is cover dated '83 sometime.
So could you drink legally?
Yeah. Well, the meeting with Marie Severin, I'm really not sure. I think I was still in high school when that meeting with Marie Severin.
Okay. So you didn't get that script, which has the vision on the airplane with the terrorists that used to give out to everybody?
Never did. And I had done KSR. I was, and Spider-Man appeared in KSR, and that got me some Marvel team up stuff. Tom DeFalco hired me to. It doesn't seem like it, but for a brief time I was the regular artist on Marvel Team Up, which it put me in the Spider-Man office, on the periphery of the Spider-Man office. So I had done like a Peter Parker fill-in while I was also doing Star Wars and I did a couple of Indiana Jones and King Conan. Actually, the first thing they offered me regular was King Conan. I had done the 2 KSARs and I did a King Conan, and they offered me King Conan, but it was a double-sized book. I forget what the frequency.
Yeah, it was like 36 pages or something.
Yeah, it was a big one, and I wasn't ready to leave the animation studio yet, so I turned that down. Then they offered me KSAR, and I was afraid they'd stop offering me things, so I took it.
Right.
And the only reason I had any hesitation at all was because, there was the Bruce Jones run. It was hugely popular coming off of Brent Anderson and everything. But I was, apparently, according to Louise Jones, I was like the last guy who enjoyed the original KSAR stories. And I was always bugging Louise. Can we do something to tie this character into the other character, the original character? Can we tell the story of how this one guy becomes the other guy? And she says, "Ron, darling, Angel, nobody cares." And I went, okay, well, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do?
Now, how were you learning? Were you going into the office? Were you getting Xeroxes of people's work? How were you picking up your chops?
A lot of it was the stuff that I was showing them in samples that they figured I could do it. Once you're working, you're working. You're in the deep end.
Yeah.
And a couple of times I would say to Louise, I said, am I doing okay? And she goes, have we asked for anything to be redrawn? And I said, no. And she goes, then you're doing okay. That kind of thing. And when DeFalco hired me on Team Up, he said, I got to warn you, Ron, I can be a bit of a prick. And I'm going, how do you mean, Tom? And he goes, well, I'm going to tell you what I want. And if you're not giving me what I want, I'm going to ask for what I want. And we're going to have some discussions about it. I said, Tom, as much as I love Louise and Danny Fingeroth was her assistant, everything, I said, as much as I love those guys and owe them everything, I am hungry for that kind of feedback. Teach me. That's the scene from Doctor Strange. Teach me. Because I was looking for that. I wanted to, I didn't want to get bad habits. I mean, that was one of the things that was going on at that time. Is a lot of people who started in the indies, all they did was spend years developing bad habits that editors in the big two or the big three would try to break them off, that kind of thing. And then it would become this argument about, but that's my style. How dare you,
Right.
that kind of thing. And I just wanted, see, I've always seen the industry as more of a craft oriented thing than an art oriented thing. I mean, because comics serve a function. They serve the function of telling a story as clearly as possible. So I've never seen it as the esoteric type of an art thing where you're expressing yourself and grinding an axe of one kind or another. You are serving a function. I mean, DeFalco and I would talk about this for hours. And what I came up with was like, a belt can be beautiful leather craft, but if it doesn't have the holes in the thing with the thing and it holds your pants up, then it's not a belt. A chest of drawers can be a beautiful piece of woodwork, but if the drawers don't go in and out and hold your socks, then it's not a chest of drawers. Comic books have a function to tell a clear story. So it's a craft thing. You can get so good at a craft that it's art, if it makes people, because one of the things we're trying to do with this craft is take two-dimensional images and make you feel something. That's alchemy. That's fantastic. I mean, when that works, the times that it's worked, it just makes you feel like you got the secret or something. You don't, but it makes you feel like maybe you do, but it's all about storytelling for me. So I wanted to learn what these guys knew. I wanted to get behind the curtain. I wanted to poke around and anytime I got to work with Tom Palmer or Joe Sinnott or Sal Buscema, I mean, I was asking those kind of questions, But the thing is, most of these guys were working illustrators, not artistes. They were working illustrators. They were doing what work on a deadline to feed their families. And that's not a bad thing at all. That does not make it less art, because I was the audience. I knew it was art because it made me feel something.
Right.
And it changed the course of my life, literally, So it's those two things are not mutually exclusive. And it used to always annoy the hell out of me when people would write off a Sal Buscema because he's a hack. I mean, even in interviews, he'll say he did it to feed his family. How dare he?
Right.
It's all BS, because it's art if you think it's art, but if it doesn't tell a story, if I have to look at a page 3 times to tell what the hell's going on, somebody didn't do their job.
Yeah, and I think especially for the greatest generation of cartoonists, from Kirby down through, the Buscemas and the guys who were, all the original Marvel crew and DC crew, all those guys, they were making a living. They were not making $100,000 a year in royalties. They were making $35 a page. And the only way that you made money was doing more pages. Now, if you were good,
right,
you could, and that's why guys like Buscema could do 5 books in a month, or Kirby, because they developed a style that allowed them to, and they were very valuable to the company. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
Your value as an artist has also changed in in that time, because when the next generation of people came in, like the Wrightsons and the Barry Smiths, they were more about the art part. They were not like the previous generations of guys, and they didn't produce as much material, but the company was still held together by the guys who could sit down and draw 40 pages a month.
Well, yeah. If you want to discuss it like another entertainment form, I only ever wanted to be a working actor. I never needed to be a star. I just wanted to get in there and tell stories, and that is still, if life hasn't beaten the passion out of me completely, the one thing I still have a passion for is telling stories. Is still that alchemy of trying to make somebody feel something by looking at a two-dimensional drawing, and having my characters act enough and have them create the illusion of reality enough that what's happening to the characters affects the people that are reading it. And that is not to be taken lightly. And anybody, I mean, all the fans that are watching right now know exactly what I'm talking about, because we all have some story that affected us, that it might have surprised us how much it affected us, but it affected us. And I've been lucky enough to work on some of those stories, and I've been lucky enough to put my heart and soul into some stories like that. That, I mean, there are stuff that I've done that I can't look at it without getting choked up. I mean, the kid who collects Spider-Man is one of them. So, I mean, but there are certain scenes that I was a part of with the Falco that affect me to this day, because I think we pulled it off. You know, that we effectively manipulated reality with two-dimensional images and color.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I always say that when I would teach it or teach storyboarding, I said what you're doing is like Bugs Bunny is a spell, because it's Mel Blanc's voice and a bunch of images projected at 24 frames a second that gives you the illusion that this character is a real person. When I say Bugs Bunny, you don't think of a drawing, you think of an actual personality.
Yeah, and I don't want anybody caught up in how I draw hands or how I draw feet, or that's not the issue. The issue is not, wow, Ron Frenz draws it always used to annoy me when people would talk about, George Perez and the incredible detail he puts into everything and all that kind of stuff. Because it meant they were looking behind the curtain to me.
Right.
And it's like, in fact, to this day, when people either on Facebook or in conversation are crabbing about something, a movie or a TV show on streaming or whatever it is, it's so obvious to me that the way they're complaining is that they weren't engaged. They were probably multitasking. They probably had their laptop on their lap while they were watching this thing, and they weren't letting the characters engage them, and it's like, well, then shut up about it, because you weren't letting the creatives do what they're supposed to do, because unless a movie is really, really, really bad, it can usually engage you if you meet it halfway. If you sit your ass down and watch it and let it create its alchemy, then it'll probably affect you to some degree. You probably find something to enjoy about it. I do. I mean, I'm a very good audience for a lot of things. Brett Breening constantly telling me that, I'm not critical enough and everything. I mean, I watch things all the time, and he'll go, "What did you think?" I said, "I really enjoyed it." And he goes, "Really?" And I said, I saw its faults, but that doesn't mean I didn't have fun with it.
Right.
Wonder Woman 84. I sat there, watched it on an afternoon when I just wanted to turn my brain off, and I enjoyed what I was seeing. Yeah, I recognize all the things they talked about. It was weird. They made some really weird choices, probably because they were trying to be so 80s. I think that's why they did the whole Heaven Can Wait thing with Steve Trevor and all this kind of stuff. But it didn't ruin the experience for me. I thought can't think of the actor's name now, but the guy that plays Mandalorian, that played the bad guy.
Yeah, yeah.
I thought he did it.
Pedro.
Yeah,
Pedro.
Pedro Pascal.
Yeah.
I thought his character was very engaging. I cared about that guy and his crappy relationship with his son and all this kind of stuff. I go ahead and let the actors do their job and see if there's something that I can relate to in them, that I can connect to.
Well, I think a lot of the stuff now, because there's so much media and fans are so spoiled, especially people under 40, especially people under 30, they've never seen anything really bad. They've never seen like really hokey stuff because that's the only stuff that you could see, right? And because there's so much, it almost makes you spoiled in a way that, like, one of the things I notice is that, like you said, they're watching or they're reading things and they're not really paying attention. I know that from a lot of message board things I'll see where on the strips that I do, people will question something in the storyline, but if actually they were paying attention, that was actually answered. That was actually, we talked about that. But they
I watched a video, a review of a movie that I hadn't seen yet, and I still haven't seen it, but Brett Breeding saw it. And in this video review, they made an assertion about this movie that ended up not being true. And I went, wait, really? And he went, yeah, no, that's not true at all. This happened. And I went, oh my God, this guy did a video review of a movie that he was not paying attention to. Why would you do that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think, one of the things we were blessed with in the time is that by the time someone hated your stuff and took the time to write a letter and mail it, you'd drawn 3 more issues. Right? It wasn't like, immediately the hour that your issue of Spider-Girl or Thor, hit the stands.
Early on in my interactions with the internet, I got into trouble because what used to tee me off is that they would start criticizing a new project based on the copy in the catalog that wasn't even written by the creatives who did the story. And they would be going, "Oh, that sounds like crap right there," and it's like, "Oh my God, they're not even giving you a chance to present your case,"
Right.
That kind of thing. And I would get kind of defensive, and then it was pointed out to me that no, with the cost of comics these days and all this kind of stuff, people have to make their decisions based on absolutely nothing and decide that you've already produced shit before they've even seen it, that kind of thing. And that's just the reality of comics today. And I'm like, oh my God, no wonder nobody likes social media.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everything has just a really bad taste to it now. And I also think people are in a hurry to be the first to hate something.
I think that's true.
Right.
But what I also see, especially with comics fans in the age of Marvel movies and everything, is that if it's not the way they would have done it, they hate it. I mean, they're prepared, like staring at the screen, just going, okay, the first thing I see that deviates from the way I would have done it, and they're screwed. It's, because how else do you explain people going, that's my favorite Marvel movie. I thought they did an incredible job reinterpreting that character or interpreting that character. And yet somebody else can go, it's shit, it's crap, and it's like, what are you basing that on? And the only thing they could possibly be basing it on is their personal opinion of what should have been done instead of what was done. And as a creative, I've gained the ability to sit back and say, okay, I can see why they made that change. Yeah, I can see that. And I can also recognize, quite honestly, not every project is about me. I'm
Hold on, I got to ring the bell for that. Hold on.
I'm a 61-year-old man. I am not going to sit on Facebook and bitch about the CW shows. They're not making them for me, for God's sakes.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can enjoy them, fine. And if I can't, I don't watch them. But I don't sit and stew about them because it wasn't the way I would have done it. You know, I mean, that's you get a sense of that when you actually have a chance to work on these characters. You get a much sober take on the fact that there are so many different ways to look at these characters. You know,
and they were always being reinterpreted and reinvented as. I mean, the Fantastic Four in 1961 and the early Spider-Mans are not the same ones. I mean, they were reinterpreted after Ditko left.
Sure.
And John Romita took over. The whole thing changed. The stories changed. The kind of stories changed.
So.
Stan Lee's writing changed.
No,
right?
I mean, yeah, and I mean, it doesn't bother me that I can't find a comic book that I enjoy reading right now, because I'm 61 years old. Hopefully nobody's producing any comics for me necessarily. You know, what I like about the craft, I can still find things that I enjoy craft-wise, and even, you know, I still enjoy a lot of what Mike Mignola does anytime he does a Hellboy story. I mean, the last time I went to a comic shop, I had a whole bunch of Hellboy one-shots and two-part stories and everything waiting for me, and I bought those up and enjoyed the heck out of those. You know, I mean, they're neat little stories. But
also, your buffer gets full. It's something I try to explain to when you have these discussions with younger people. It's not like you don't like things or that you hate everything that's modern, but you know, your buffers gets full by the time you're 50. You've seen a lot of great stuff.
Yeah.
And what might be great to them just, you know, comes here or comes there. It's not going to come up to the top for you. Some of it is you're not 12 years old anymore and you didn't see it. You don't get that rush you got when you were 12.
But some of it is we've seen it before too.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, just recently I saw the Destroyer with Thor's cape or something like that. Everybody was getting all worked up about it, and I went, "Yeah, it was neat when Walt and Sal did it." Right,
right.
Know, in issue 380 or something. You know, it was right before Tom and I came on.
Right. Well, so, I think that's
we've kind of seen it all before as well. You know,
and it's harder, I think, actually. Even, I mean, I deal with the Phantom, but any character that you're dealing with from the pulp era. Pulp is dead to any young person. They don't understand it. They didn't grow up and watching it. They were not exposed to it. The closest you could get is Star Wars and Indiana Jones as far as having the roots in pulp, even though the people being exposed to it don't know anything about pulp, right? So when you show a young person pulp, they don't understand the references. We got it because we were fed it through Johnny Quest. You know, we were fed it through.
It's interesting. Joe Jusko was just making that point on Facebook that his treatment on Tarzan has changed because when he did the cards back in the day, they were trying to bring in a younger audience and everything. So he bulked them up and had them looking more veiny and muscular and everything. But now for these ERB covers, you know, he's doing something a little more athletic and less Schwarzenegger, you know, that kind of thing. And so it does have to do with the audience you're dealing with and you know, what you're trying to accomplish with this treatment of the character. And, you know, there's always going to be creatives that are going to make choices that I'm not going to agree with. You know, sometimes, you know, how rare is it that somebody's going to do exactly what you wish they would do with any given character? Right. You know, I mean, actually, I think my chances of that happening have all been used up by Feige and Marvel right now, because Captain America: The First Avenger was a damn near perfect movie.
That's still my favorite one. Yeah, that feels like you read a Marvel comic.
Yeah. I mean, and you know, even what they did right in those first two Fantastic Four movies, that Tim Story did, I enjoyed that casting. I thought they nailed the characters, the changes they made. I understood why they made them, and yet people dog those movies because of some of the choices they made. And I'll sit here till the end of time and say, Galactus wasn't a cloud. You saw the shadow of his helmet up there in the cloud. What are you talking about? Galactus wasn't a cloud, you know. And people are going, "Oh, you're just doing too much work for the product." I'm going, "No, I just, you know, even this whole thing about Uncle Ben doesn't exist in the Marvel universe. There is a line in Homecoming where when Ned asks if Aunt May knows that he's Spider-Man, when Ned finds out, and he goes, "No, I can't do that to her. Not after everything she's been through." And that was, as far as I'm concerned, as a viewer watching this, having seen the origin of Spider-Man twice in the theater and dozens and dozens of times retold in comics, that was them acknowledging Uncle Ben, as far as I was concerned. It's like, stop. I mean, maybe I'm doing too much work for them. You're not doing any work at all. You're not meeting this product halfway at all.
Right. Meet us in the middle at least. Right. Yeah.
Right. So, and finally, in What If, he mentions Uncle Ben, and now they're going, that's the first time Uncle Ben's been mentioned in the MCU. And it's like, if you say so, go ahead.
Hey, Ron, I have a question from the room, and there's some really great chatter going on. There's a lot of yup, going on during our conversation. But JRD asks, going back to storytelling, what influenced your storytelling, Ron? Was it exclusively comics and two-dimensional art, or did you also watch a lot of films? And if so, what directors?
I could not really get into directors with you. The things that got me going were animation. I grew up heavily influenced by the Alex Toth Hanna-Barbera characters and the 67 Spider-Man cartoon, the Filmation Superman Aquaman hour, things like that. I can remember viscerally sitting there going, God, I just wish I could get inside those guys' heads and draw like that, that kind of thing. And the storytelling was tight and clean. I mean, they would do those 7-minute adventures, of Space Ghost or whoever it was, and of course Johnny Quest and all that kind of stuff. But when I started really paying attention to what was going on in the comic books that I was reading as far as storytelling, somewhere I got the idea, and I forget where it was. Maybe it was in an interview with somebody I respected, maybe not. I don't know. But I would turn on an episode of Bonanza and turn off the sound and watch the story. And it was a wonderful education in just how you frame things. And what was amazing to me is Ramita is all over. Either Bonanza is all over Ramita or Ramita is all over Bonanza, because sometimes just the way these things were framed, where like there was a guy looking in a window and the way the whole shot was framed and everything reminded me so much of Kirby and Ramita and the guys that were doing Marvel Comics at that time, that it was a real eye-opening experience for me, that it all applies. It's all the same stuff. But that turning off the sound experiment, and I mean, when the first jobs I did for Marvel, as I mentioned, I was still living at home. My mom was my test kitchen. I would do a series of pages. She had no idea what the plot was. I didn't let her know what the plot was. I would show her the pages, and she didn't know who the characters were, but she would say, oh, this guy's mad at that guy. Oh my goodness, now he slammed the door. He's left the office. This guy's not happy with what just went down. And if she could tell me that, then I knew I was doing my job. If I could show it to a civilian and the civilian could tell me in general terms what was going on, then I had done my job. And I viciously used my mother that way early on in my career, and would always try to find somebody that you could bounce it off of that way, to make sure you knew you were doing your part of the job.
I have an old design thing I say to anytime I'm working with young people. It's very, very simple. It's, what would Nana do? Like, if you made this design and showed it to your grandmother, can she read it?
Right.
Does it make sense? Could she say it back to you? If not, it doesn't work.
Right.
There's something about simplicity.
It's not rocket science. I mean, when people started to get really, in the 80s with the advent of Frank Millers, who were bringing in more of the European stuff, and people were doing these insert shots of people's eyes and all this kind of jazz, that you better know what you're doing, or you're going to lose
Yeah.
The people you're talking about. And I looked at a lot of portfolios when I first broke in, when I was, on Spider-Man and on Thor, where it was people still trying to do that, still trying to be fancy with all the insert shots. And I'd be going like, I can't tell what that is. Well, that's his hand on the doorknob. I'm going, well, I'm sorry, you're not Gene Colan yet. You can't make a panel of a hand on a doorknob without making it look like a hand on a doorknob.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
quit worrying about making it look like negative space and everything, because your primary job is to tell the story, not just make a pretty art piece for page 12. I mean, if you're not telling the story on that page, you're not doing your job. And the writer's going to have to work double duty, or the editor's going to have something redrawn, or somebody's going to have to pick up the slack. So, do your job. And one time, not all that long ago, really, I went to my alma mater high school because they were gonna try to start an after school comics club thing, where they were going to do this big project where they were going to break into teams of editors, writers, pencilers, inkers, colorists, and they were going to produce their own comics as this experiment to understand the process.
Yeah.
And what shocked the royal hell out of me, I gave my little opening presentation about, once it's decided who's doing what, then stay in your lane and do the best job you can. And every question I got after I was done and people were free-forming and coming up and just asking me questions, they were all about, what if I don't like the story that the guy came up with? And what if I think he's wrong? What if I think this? What if I think that? I said, I don't care. I mean, if the editor has said that's the story you're working with and you don't do your job, then that's on you. You do the best job you can with the story you're given. That's your job.
That's great advice.
And but I was stunned. These are high school kids.
Sure.
That haven't done anything, and yet ego was already rampant in their creative interactions. And it's like, oh my God.
Yeah, and that's a great snapshot of the internet right there, Ron.
Yeah.
Right. Everybody has an opinion, but hasn't put the work in.
Right. And the fact is when you're working on a team, you cannot just decide, well, I don't like this story. I'm going to totally change the way that it's going.
And yet, Mike, we've all heard stories. I mean, there was one guy that I interacted with briefly on Facebook, and he was always looked like he was trying to get me to say something negative about working for Marvel or working for the Big Two or whatever, And I never really got where he was coming from until I mentioned his name to Tom DeFalco. And DeFalco laughed because this was a guy who finally had a shot at, and pardon me if you don't feel the same way about the companies and everything, but, for me, it was always the big three, Marvel, DC, and Archie. And, they were the guys that were running the business, right? So anyway, he had a shot at Marvel. He had a shot at Marvel. He was given a Moon Knight plot about it was a DeFalco plot. Denny O'Neil was the editor, and it was a very pulpy type of a thing with like some kind of a cult and all this kind of stuff. And the pages started coming in, and Denny O'Neil calls Tom and says, "Could you come to my office?" And Tom comes in, and he's looking at the pages, and they were flying saucers and aliens. and then and Tom said, "Well, where are these from?" Because these are from your plot. And he goes, "No, they're not. What the hell?" And he said, I know. He just decided he didn't want to do your story, and he did something else. And I don't know how I feel about this. And Tom said, I'll tell you how I feel about it. That's ridiculous. We're not paying him for this. He didn't produce. I mean, and now this guy walks around with a chip on his shoulder about how he got treated at Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, stay in your lane, do your damn job, man.
Yeah. You have to have you also have to have the right personality along with the right skill set.
But if you get into this business not knowing that it's collaborative, then you're nuts. I mean, I got into this business without even training myself on the inking tools. I mean, I used them in art school. I used crow quills and everything in art school. But I got into this job primarily as a penciler. And you know, in my own way, I was kind of rewarded because I got to work with Tom Palmer and Joe Sinnott and Brett Breeding and Sal Buscema and on and on and on. Joe Rubenstein, you know, guys like that. And I was completely open to the collaboration working with an inker. You know, it's not always fantastic. You know, I mean, sometimes they make choices that you're kind of wondering why, but you know, you also need to have the attitude that, you know, the audience doesn't know that. The audience doesn't know that he shifted your eyeball, you know, 3 degrees to the left, and they don't care. You know, it's one of those kind of things.
Yeah.
I mean, the final product is what matters, and the final product is what rules the day. And you know what? If I'm working in pencil and the next guy's working in India ink, guess which is permanent? You know? So those are choices you make, and you deal with the ramifications of those choices. I've always been comfortable collaborating. I mean, does that mean I don't sometimes bitch to my friends over a beer? No, of course I do. But that doesn't color how I feel about the job overall, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm only now getting really comfortable and steady with an ink line from doing commissions for the last 5-10 years, you know? I mean, I finally have a really steady hand when it comes to drawing an arc with ink, you know, and I never did that before. I never felt I had to, and I still don't feel like I have to, except if somebody's going to pay for a commission, a full color commission, then Ron's got to do it.
Right.
You know.
Now, when you, I take it you probably still have pages from your heyday. Did you go back when you would get a job and, okay, here you did, you know, I remember you were laying out the Star Wars stuff, and you would go back and see the choices that Tom made that enhanced what you did, and you go, okay.
That all contributes to you developing a finishing style of your own. Sure. But I mean, we were never really simpatico, because I had my own reference for Luke and Leia and Lando and all this kind of stuff. And, you know, I mean, he had his own template already in his head for what these characters looked like. And that's what he was being paid to do. I was being paid to tell the story. So I wasn't sitting there spending extra time worrying about this cool little shot of Luke's face, because the chances that Tom was going to ink it the same way were slim to none, because he already had a template in his head for what these characters looked like. So you also know where to spend the time, and you know what is your lane. You know, what is your responsibility on these particular pages? And now when I'm full penciling, and part of my job is telling the story through the expressions of the characters and the body attitudes of the characters and everything, then I'm a little more concerned about how those things are translated into ink. I mean, I never had to worry about it with Sal. Sal and I were very hand in glove. I learned so much of my visual shorthand from Sal and his brother John that oftentimes the pages would come in on Spider-Girl, and I'd go, oh man, that kind of lost that expression a little bit. I'd go back and look at my pencil Xeroxes and go, no, he didn't. I did. You know,
Did you ever meet John?
I briefly once in Tom DeFalco's office. Yeah.
And where you're like,
I actually, it was a funny thing, because he was talking to Tom about he had just taken a new job with a young editor, and he's like, am I going to get my plots from this guy, Tom? And, you know, and DeFalco was going, we'll take care of you, John. We'll make sure you always have the work on your desk, blah, blah, blah. And I said, can I ask what your new project is, sir? And he goes, oh, yeah, it's the guy with the blue shirt. And I knew he was working with Don Daly, so I went, the Punisher? And he went, yeah, the Punisher. So the Punisher with the guy with the blue
shirt. Not even the guy with the skull, just the guy with the blue shirt.
With the blue shirt. Yeah. But so it was terrific. I mean, DeFalco insists in that meeting that when we shook hands and he was introduced to me, DeFalco insists that Buscema went, oh, very nice stuff. I didn't. If they, I still had, buzzing in my head and everything. So
you had Kirby crackles going around your head.
I cannot in any way confirm that. I think Tom is just being kind because he's always protected me that way.
Did you ever? And I take it you talked many times with Sal.
Oh, Sal and I actually became friends, which still to this day fries my wires. Yeah, and Sal talks about the fact that John was aware of some of the younger guys like me and everything that he and Sal would discuss it sometimes and all that kind of stuff. The thing that's interesting though is like Sal's one of the people that doesn't recognize all of my Sal influences. He must have actually talked to Tom DeFalco one time and said, I'm hearing a lot of people talk about the fact that my work has really influenced Ron and that Ron has a lot of me in him. He goes, do you see it, Tom? And he goes, everybody sees it, Sal. You're the only one that doesn't see it. And he goes, really? Really? So, Sal's approach was he agreed with a lot of what I did. He wasn't necessarily recognizing that I did it because that's the way he did it, but he just agreed with it.
Maybe it's the kind of thing where you don't necessarily recognize your own style and influence.
It's like when somebody says that guy looks like you, and you went, "Really? I don't see it." I mean, I'm sure it's very much that. Yes, yeah. I mean, I don't think it's Sal is like nuts or anything, but I think you do have a harder time noticing the things that people identify as you, because it's just the way you do things. I mean, at one point, there was only one time that Sal at one point said, Ron, stop doing that. I got into this thing where I was looking at reference of ballerinas for Spider-Girl and the way they point their toes and the way the foot looks when the arch is pointed and, the heel is here and the toes are coming at you and everything. And they were looking like little wedges. And I thought I'd kind of come up with that. I thought was a kind of a dynamic way to show that as Spider-Girl was, coming towards you or something like that. And Sal at one point said, what is that, Ron? And I explained it to him the way I just explained it to you. And he went, don't do that. and if Sal Buscema tells you to not do something, don't do it.
There you go. There you go. I wanted to talk like there was that transition, like many of us guys who were working at Marvel, then one by one kind of like all went over to DC. So you left Marvel and you went over to work at on Superman, and you got to work on the newer, I guess that was post Burn.
Superman. Oh, very post Burn.
Yeah.
Actually, there were two things. Right around the time that we were canned off of Spider-Man, I had a graphic novel that I was working on that I gave back because I just didn't feel I was qualified for it, and I was dealing with having been fired off of Spider-Man and everything. So I gave that back, and I took some hits professionally for that. So there was some downtime, and then I got the 2 Thor fill-ins from Ralph Macchio, but then I also got a Superman annual, the first of 2 Superman annuals I did for Mike Carlin that were burned. I did the new Superman annual #1 with Titano, and then I did the next year, I did the one where Roger Stern was going to reintroduce all of the Kirby concepts to the Byrne Superman. And worked on both of those with Brett Breeding, plus he inked the 2 Thors that I did. So I was slowly getting my pins back under me and feeling better about it. So I did work early in the Byrne run. But then we did like 7 years on Thor. We did 2 years of Thunderstrike. And the Perlman people were ravaging Marvel and the bankruptcy and all that terribleness. And people were getting fired left and right. And contracts weren't worth anything. And Thunderstrike had been canceled because of the Perlman people. And Mark Grunwald did his best to try to find work for everybody, but he just couldn't do it. And I had somewhere to land because Mike Carlin, who would never poach talent. Brett Breeding let him know that Thunderstrike was wrapping up, and thank God Mike thought I might be a decent fit for Superman, and they hired me on Superman. And like I said earlier, that was a tough gig, man. It was exactly what you were talking about with Batman. You had to get your layouts done and send them off and be in the next package and all this kind of stuff so people could get going on things. You didn't have time to sit with a plot. I mean, I used to like to read a plot, make some notes, take a couple of days, stew with it a little bit, think about it, get it going in my head before I sat down. You didn't have time to do any of that on the Superman. You just had to jump in and start going. And, it was fascinating. But, I mean, the guys who did it for any period of time have nothing but my undying respect and admiration, because that was a tough gig.
And did you, like, for me, the certain characters automatically live in my head? Like Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, all the Marvel characters live in my imagination. So if I was going to sit down and draw Captain America, he's already there. But some people are more Marvel guys. Some people are more DC guys. So, like, were you an artist? Like, you followed artists, or were you like a character guy who followed characters? Because that also, seems that there's that difference too, where there's some people like, I never read DC, I only read Marvel. So
yeah, no, I wasn't that guy. I mean, my love of comics started with Batman and Superman, World's Finest, and things like that, before I discovered Marvel. But I discovered Marvel by the time I was like 6 or 7, that kind of thing. But yeah, Batman is always going to have a special place in my heart. But specifically, Carmen Infantino New Look Batman, because that's what was going on when my brother and I were reading Batman comics, that kind of thing. So as far as Superman goes, what's interesting with that is Superman encompasses so much. I didn't. I always have this thing when I get a chance to work on a character to go back to the roots of that character. And with Superman, you're talking Joe Shuster, that kind of thing. But what was cool is that John Bogdanov was working on the books when I was brought in, and he was already bringing elements of Joe Shuster's original design back to the character. So he was kind of opening the door for me to do that. He was opening the door for me to bring in some George Reeves. I always drew Clark with a double-breasted coat, and once or twice even drew him with the hat, that kind of thing. And so there's so much to tap for Superman. For me, it was the Superman cartoon that was going on at the time, the
Bruce Timm, the Bruce Timm stuff.
There was that. There was George Reeves. There was what Bogdanov was doing, bringing in the Schuster stuff. So I was, it was a big amalgam of things for me that as I was working on the books, and also just trying to stay somewhere in the same realm. I mean, you didn't want every book looking different or anything like that. I think the most different it got was the work that Stu Immerman was doing at the time. That had some beautiful, real illustrative work to it, a lot of shadow work and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, it was, Kitson or Geis or Jurgens or Bogdanov. So it was very, standard comic book stuff. So I really, again, I didn't have a lot of time to experiment. So you were just kind of drawing, I didn't really have a lot of time to think about it, to tell you the truth. And again, I was working with Joe Rubenstein, who, you can't ask for a better anchor man when it comes to that kind of stuff. He's going to make it finished. He's going to make it look complete. He's going to make it look like you knew what you were doing, that kind of thing.
I had a question and I just lost it. Oh, going back to Marvel for a second, Ron, Myra asks, what inspired the creation of Spider-Girl? Are there traits she has based on real women in your life or heroines from comics?
Yeah. Spider-Girl was, of course, that's something that lived with Tom DeFalco for quite a while, because he was working on the books during the Clone Saga and during Mary Jane's pregnancy. So his brain kind of went to that what if they actually would have pulled the trigger on the kid and all that kind of stuff. So when he was the regular writer for What If for a period of time, that was one of the stories he wanted to do. And he asked me if I'd be interested in working with him on it. So we immediately started collaborating the way we always do and decided to kind of treat it like a pilot. And we were in kind of an interesting space because we could kind of say, we're coming back to these characters. Let's say they were canceled when we left the book, and we get to come back on these characters, and all this time has passed, and we can, just deal with the time that has passed, and they've got a kid now, and it was always an easy sell because those crazy kids from the first Spider-Man movie, that upside down kiss,
Yeah,
married, they have a kid, voila, and I know for DeFalco, there were a lot of the Pete Mayday dynamic was based on his brother and niece and arguments he would hear them have because apparently, he had served in the armed forces and at one point I might be getting the story confused, but she considered being a cop, and they would have these real go-rounds, where he was in the position of being the parental hypocrite, that type of thing, which was a big part of what was going on, the dynamic between Pete and Mayday. I was the one that was guilty of stealing the nickname from Cheers because her name was going to be May, and we came up with the idea that she was popular with both the nerds and the jocks. So, we were looking for something that was her basketball persona, and Mayday was a natural thing. So we came up with that, and the initial dynamic and the first story is something that I really enjoy. It's one of the single beginning, middle, and an end stories that I feel like the one I had a lot to contribute into. I felt we effectively told the story because the whole issue was that she, unlike Peter Parker, she was always divided. She was always split up the middle. When she was with her nerd friends, she had to deny her jock half. And when she was with her jock friends, she had to deny her nerd self. And we made that very clear in the early part of the story. And it was finding out about her legacy as of Spider-Man as Spider-Girl that she was able to combine the two halves of herself and feel complete. Finding Spider-Girl was a joyous thing for her. And, early in the run, unlike Pete, who discovers that with great power must also come great responsibility because of a tragedy, the lesson Pete learned was people will get hurt if he doesn't use his power. The lesson that Mayday learned early on was that people will not get hurt if she does use her powers. So there was this subtle but substantial...
No guilt.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. There's subtle but substantial difference in their whole approach to being a superhero. And it was all very organic, but it really resonated. And as a strip, it was really wonderful to see it take off because, the older fans liked it because Pete aged with them.
Yeah.
The younger fans liked it because it was legacy, and we had a lot of female readers because it was a female lead. And it just was a wonderful, wonderful experience all around, and the fans are just incredible. I've yet to meet a Spider-Girl fan that didn't like the book for all the right reasons and didn't relate to the character for all kinds of really inspiring reasons. And they're just lovely, lovely people. So it was a wonderful experience. And yeah, you can't help but use, during Thor and Thunderstrike, I was using a lot of people from my life anyway. But so yes, there were a lot of the dynamics of the character that were based on women in my life. The same with Go, and the same with Pat Olive. Pat Olive would use elements of his sister, for me, Pat once pointed out to me that I was the only one that in any way used romantic relationships. His were filial with his sister. Tom's were filial, but mine were actually, a little more outside the familial. And not that I thought it mattered at all. I mean, I respected the character greatly and wanted to keep doing what he and with Pat and Tom had established, which was, she was not a sexualized character at all. And,
yeah. I think that's something that's kind of unique, because usually when they bring the female version, she's always like booty out, like, oh, it's all about.
And there was always talk about, like, taking her out of the MC2 and bringing her to the 616, and it was like, but then what? She's a teenager. What do you do with her once she's here? Because the one of the real selling points of the book was the family, was the fact that she was a legacy character, was the fact that she was dealing with her dad and his built-in parental hypocrisy, and the dynamic there, and the fact that Pete and Mary Jane were lead characters in the book. I mean, that's all what made the book a success. So to take that away in an attempt to bring her to the 616 so she can interact with a younger version of her dad is just it just felt very X-Men, very creepy, very, what do you do with her then? And we were never interested in pursuing that,
Yeah. Well, in the business, it's like, oh, if we make this thing that's successful, let's make another thing. Let's make another. Like, that's why there's 90 Batman books. It's because, like, Batman sells. Let's make another younger.
And then there's another half dozen female Spider-Man characters now too. So it's with Spider-Gwen, a lot of the fans and even the Renew Your Vows stuff. What really was fascinating to me is I didn't read the Renew Your Vows stuff, even though a lot of it was Jerry Conway. But the fans are telling me how much they did in Renew Your Vows that paralleled stuff that we did in Spider-Girl, and it was just, it's fascinating. It's always fascinating to me that, great minds think alike. And, when people go, well, they ripped you off of it. No, they didn't rip us off. There was only so much to do with that concept, with the if you're going to have a daughter of Spider-Man and you're going to decide to do another daughter of Spider-Man, you're going to have
certain gimmies, that you're going to do with that,
gimmies there that are just going to happen, and it makes you wonder why, but they did it, and they made some more sales off of it, and way above my pay grade.
So what are the when you look back at because you had very distinct different time periods, and as you were doing each run, the business was also in a very different place, because it was a different place when you were doing Spider-Gwen than when you were on Spider-Man when you were on
Mike.
Spider-Girl.
Spider-Gwen. Don't say Spider-Gwen to me.
Right, Spider-Girl.
Thanks.
When you were doing that, the business had changed quite a bit, and do you feel like you were moving in a different way yourself as a creative person in that?
I don't think so. I mean, that was part of the what I was talking about before, is having our own little pocket universe. We weren't being wrapped up in a lot of the stuff that was going on with the big crossovers and all that kind of stuff. I mean, to some degree, we had a couple of editors that were actually trying to involve us even tangentially with things. Like when they did Brand New Day, our editor came to us and said, I want you to do Brand New May. And Tom went, what is that? And she goes, you get to find out. You get to choose what that is. Mm-hmm. So Tom and I came up with something, that kind of thing. I mean, we finally went ahead and embraced, the clone stuff and everything, to just kind of to do a very, very different take on it, or at least try to. And, I mean, it was interesting because our fans were so involved, and yet Tom always had this sense that the fans only think they want control. They want to be surprised. They want to be entertained and thrilled and surprised. They only think they want to tell you what to do. That kind of thing. And he's always had an incredible sense of the craft and the professional distance that's necessary between the creatives and the fans. He's been at this for a while, and he's always had his antenna up. So he's an incredible mentor. He really is.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of the old guys sort of had that attitude. It's like, they did it. Like John Buscema might be an example that comes to mind, because he obviously was a super passionate person about what he did, but he would sort of, you would read these sayings or interviews would kind of give you the idea like, this stuff is kind of silly.
Oh yeah,
who cares? Yeah,
He always complained anytime they called him with a new Spider-Man plot. Ramirez talks about how he said, he hated Aunt May, he hated Jameson, he hated all the, oh my God, not another one of those. And yet, I mean, he couldn't tell a bad story.
Yeah, I remember there was supposedly when he was drawing the Silver Surfer, he would put those little border notes in, and he's got the Silver Surfer, being all dramatic, and he goes, "The wimp cries."
Well, the story that fascinated me was when he did Silver Surfer #4, which is considered a classic. It's considered one of the finest pieces of comic storytelling in the modern age, if you want to put it that way, in the Silver Age. And Stan hated it. I mean, Stan had notes all over it because he was doing fancy borders and he was breaking out a little bit from the Kirby and being more emotive with his figure work and everything. It was, a lot of the Michelangelo was really coming out in him, and it's just some beautiful, beautiful gesturing and really broad, wonderful acting. And apparently Stan wasn't crazy about it at the time. And then years later, when Stan was writing up like copy for like Bring On the Bad Guys or something like that, he had occasion to mention to John, what a beautiful job that was. My God, Silver Surfer #4 was a beautiful job. And Buscema just laughed at him and went, "You did nothing but chew my ass about that at the time, Stan. Don't give me this crap." And he goes, "Really? I did that?" All this stuff. So,
yeah.
It's just, one man's.
It did. His work did change after that. It was never as much of a flourish, always beautifully drawn.
I've always loved early Buscema because the acting is just so broad and wonderful and dramatic. I mean, that's what I loved about the Marvel Comics of my youth, is the melodrama. I that's always fascinated me, and I wish you could do more, because I mean, oftentimes when you're trying to tell incredibly human stories, and people are standing in a room talking, it's harder to find those moments of people dramatically sitting in chairs and leaning on things and all this kind of stuff. I mean, I used to, when I was doing A-Next over at the MC2 line, I was always wholesale swiping from Buscema's early Avengers run with Tom Palmer, where he would have like the giants in the room and people leaning on their knees and all this kind of stuff, just to get that kind of old Marvel feel to it, that incredible larger than life feeling to it that is such a part of what I think of when I think of Marvel Comics, that kind of thing.
Yeah, we've talked about this before. I feel that one of the negative impacts of the success of the films is on the style of Marvel Comics now, because they're much more pedestrian and photo-based, of people standing around. Like when Dr. Doom stood, he always stood, in a regal. When Thor or Loki sat, was that great regal Buscema slouch, and now he's just like,
no, it's true. There's some fantastic illustrators working in comics, but they're not recognizing how to draw comics the Marvel way. It is a very different thing. It's like comparing apples and oranges. You're right. I was so clueless that when I saw those first Fantastic Four movies and they could do the Human Torch convincingly with CGI and everything, I actually thought, this is this is a thought I actually had in my stupid head, was that, geez, Brian Hitch and Alex Ross, they're out of jobs now, man, because we can do this anytime we want. This is going to be the re-advent of drawing the Human Torch like Jack Kirby used to and all this kind of stuff, because now we don't have to compete with what it would look like photorealistically, because now we can see it photorealistically.
Right,
now
right.
comic books can go back and be comic books. And now I think about that and, oh, Ron, I'm so adorable and stupid and idiotic, because that's not what happened. That was just what I was hoping was going to happen.
Right.
So, yeah, I tend to agree with you. Anytime comics embraces being the redheaded stepchild of other visual mediums, then it's not living up to its potential.
Mhm.
Anytime, and unfortunately, a lot of these beautifully illustrated comics are content to just be storyboards for movies. That is not the same as being an effective comic the way we were trained, the way, we were taught the Marvel way, the Kirby way,
Or just even the way that Kirby would, and I've talked about to Brett about this a lot, the way Kirby would look at New York City, and then he came up with that way of abstracting it in his design that gave you the feeling of New York, but it doesn't look like New York. It's a Jack Kirby abstraction of the city and the detail, but when you looked at it, you felt like it was New York, and that's an incredible skill to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I mean, but even as late as the Perez's and the Burns, I mean, they were doing their own version of that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry we've lost it. I am, because, I mean, everybody loves the comics that were the way comics were when they discovered comics.
Right.
I mean, for me, it's always going to be the late 60s, early 70s. For the people that are discovering now, God love them. It's going to be different. It's going to be different. It just is. That's the nature of things. I'll keep buying books that I remember having when I was a kid. I'll keep going into comic shops and looking for back issue bins and rediscovering things and spending Friday night deep in my own nostalgia, that kind of thing. But that's the way it works. That is in no way a value judgment against what's currently being done in comics. I just hope the medium survives. That's all.
Well, I think the medium is surviving quite well outside of the direct market. I mean, we always talk about webtoons. I mean, there are literally, Ron, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of young Ron Frenzs and Mike Manley and Jamar Nicholases out there drawing and telling stories that they are passionate about. It's never going to be Spider-Man. It's never going to be Iron Man. It's never going to be that stuff because they never read that stuff. And we always talk about it on the podcast, but I know this because I know some of them.
Right.
And I know this because I've been teaching for like 20 years. And the kids today get all their comics through this. So they're on webtoons and they're very passionate about, just as passionate as we were about wanting to work, but they don't want to draw Spider-Man.
Right.
They're like, that doesn't interest them.
Right.
That's not something, they're seeing stuff that's, especially for the female artists, and there's thousands of female artists out there. You go on Instagram, there's thousands of young, talented female artists. Like, I'm sure when you were going around and showing your portfolio, just like I was, I never saw a girl showing. I never saw a female standing in line showing her portfolio. It was always dudes. And now there's way more, it seems to me, more females trying to do comics than even guys trying to do comics.
No, that's terrific. I mean, that's wonderful. I mean, I do think that comics have not done their job in staying current. I don't think we should have left the newsstand when we did. I think we should have found a different format rather than leave the newsstand for the direct sales market. Because, of course, now all magazines taking it on the chin, and it's just not a viable delivery system anymore. But,
would you do a web comic? Would you be open to doing something on the internet?
The stuff that we are doing, all the Blue Baron work and the Heroes Union is all available on Comixology. It's not being done specifically for that, but I know Pat Olive and his writing partner are doing a strip specifically for comicsology. It's designed to work as a cyber comic, you know. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't have any problem with the delivery system as long as you're telling stories. Um, so, you know, and as I said earlier, I don't even know, it might have been before we went live. You know, at this point between now and when they throw dirt on my face, I'd like to do superheroes. I think that's still a viable way to tell stories about the human condition. I think it's an exciting, dynamic way to tell stories about the human condition. In the same way people are science fiction fans or you know, detective noir fans or whatever. I think the superhero template is a terrific way to tell stories about the human condition, and still hope to be able to do that for as long as I'm still able to tell stories.
Hey Ron, we're running out of time, but I have a bunch of questions. If you'd humor me, it's time for the lightning round.
Oh my goodness!
Question Palooza.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw a bunch of stuff at you, and if you just could give me like some sharp answers, and you know, if you want to delve on it, that's fine.
I'll try to give you some sharp answers. Yeah, go ahead.
So, well, my first one is for me. How has technology changed in your studio? Do you work digitally at all? You still pencil and paper? Any type of tech that you do use in your studio?
Other than my computer for quick reference, no, nothing. One of the reasons I loved getting into comics to begin with was because it was one of the last bastions of a man alone with a pencil and a blank sheet of something, and that's what I still really enjoy.
And some Rubylith.
No, I have not embraced any of the new technologies at all.
Okay. So even with finishing projects and getting them out the door, I'm assuming you scan stuff and send it on to the next.
Yeah. I mean, but I was working with Sal even on Heroes Union and everything. Now I'm still sending pages off.
You're sending the physical page out.
Yeah, we're still sending the physical pages out.
Wow.
And all that kind of stuff. So we're going to be dividing up pages, and we will still have some art for the aftermarket and all that kind of stuff, at least for the time being. Yeah.
That's amazing. So you're still doing stacking a FedEx box.
Old school, baby.
I love it. All right. Eternity Forever asks, have you ever wanted to bring your own characters to life through Kickstarter or something like that in the future?
Yes. In fact, currently we're going to be going live at some point. Maybe we already have with a Kickstarter for a character that Falco and I have had percolating, and so you'll be hearing about that in the coming weeks. But it's not something that I'm crazy about. As I said, I've spent a lot of time avoiding the business end of this whole thing. So I was always hoping there's always going to be a Darren Henry, if not actual Darren Henry, to be there to pay me to co-create with him and to tell stories with him. But yeah, I'm sure at some point, as the avenues open up with Kickstarter and issues like that, I would like to. I have plenty of characters that I don't have a big book load full of them or anything, because I became very comfortable with the idea, partly because of working with Tom, because he's very much the same kind of an animal. Is that, if you want us to create something, that's what we do. Tom said, start thinking of yourself more, Ron, as a professional creative force. We're idea machines.
Yeah.
If somebody wants us to do a story, do you have any Captain America stories you'd like to tell? No. When do you need one? And we'll come up with one. And tell us if it needs to be 5 pages or 10 pages or 22 pages or 60 pages or whatever, and we will create to fit. That's kind of it's kind of a throwback attitude, a kind of a throwback take on what we do. But really, it's what we do. We're commercial illustrators, commercial writers who are, interested in telling stories with these types of characters. But we will create to fit. that kind of thing. So I don't have a lot of frustrated characters from art school or anything that I still want to get onto paper or anything like that. No, not really.
Okay. All right. Another one. Eternity and Forever is the MVP of the chat. Has got another one for you. Ron, what's with the shiny nose highlight on Thor and Thunderstrike's faces? That always stood out to me when reading.
Shiny nose.
I guess you had like a flourish, or maybe that was a color.
Yeah. It's not something that I'm aware that I did a lot. Thor and Thunderstrike, especially. Oh, I don't know. I don't know. Apparently, Sinnott would have been complicit, or Al Milgrom would have been complicit in the whole thing. But
yeah, what is your shiny nose fetish, Ron?
I don't know. There was on Spider-Girl, we used to get a lot of people would talk about these lines I would put on the nose that made the characters look too old. And I'm like, what lines are they talking about? Because, like Gil Kane used to do like lines on cute girls. And I'm going, am I doing that? No, wait a minute.
Right.
And I mean, maybe they're just talking about the bridge of the nose because, sometimes with pretty girls you just do the nostrils,
right.
You don't really do the. So I'm not quite sure what Eternity Forever is referring to. If it annoyed you, I apologize.
You'll send her a bottle of whiteout. She can go through her comics.
That's right.
But it is comics, so it's not like TV. So we're not powdering the noses. So sometimes they do get shiny because, being superheroes can be a sweaty business.
That's right. All right, and also our good buddy Tim Ogline. Hey Tim, asks, how does it feel to have worked on the all-time best Spider-Man story, The Kid Who Collects Spider-Man?
Pretty damn good, Tim. Pretty damn good. No, it's something that, fortunately, I'm still very proud of to this day. I've talked about it before in different interviews, but it was one of those 1 in a million deals. And Mike and Jamar, I'm sure you have, maybe you've had this wonderful experience where everything works. It doesn't happen all the time, but everybody brought their A game. Everybody did their job, and it all came together and looked good. It looked solid. Nobody did anything that went off the rails, that didn't blend, that didn't serve the whole.
Right.
And those 11 pages benefited from that. Everybody brought their A game, from Joe Rosen to Christy Shield to Terry Austin to even me. And the Roger Stern story, all I had to do was stay the hell out of the way because the Roger Stern story was very, very powerful. So it is something that to this day I can honestly say I'm very proud of. I'm proud to have been a part of it. It's flattering that it's considered an all-time best thing. It benefited from retelling the origin and all this kind of stuff, and yeah, I think it really encompasses what I enjoy most about comics and about the Spider-Man character, is that it's about what kind of a human being Peter Parker is, and so I think it functioned on so many wonderful levels like that. Yeah, it was a special piece, and I'm very, 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 very fortunate to have been a part of it.
Well, thanks. That's a great answer. And last one for Eternity, as the cleanup. Sanford Green announced working on the Spider-Verse 2 film. I don't know if you heard about that. Do you think you would get anything from Marvel if Spider-Girl were to appear in the second animated film?
If she's licensed, we would probably get a check. We get credit, and we get a nice little amount of money in the Marvel films, because when they were doing Ant-Man and they decided to do Scott Lang and Hank Pym, somebody Googled whether or not Hank Pym had a daughter in any permutation of the comics. And in A Next, we had twins, Henry Jr. and Hope. So they took the name Hope from our A Next run. So now, anytime Evangeline Lilly appears as Hope Pym in the movies, we get a nice little screen credit, and they cut us a check. So if Spider-Girl, if Mayday Parker as Spider-Girl appeared in Spider-Verse, I'm assuming we would. I don't know whether that applies to the Sony stuff too.
Right.
There's all kinds of questions I can't answer.
Yeah.
But, whether or not we would get a screen credit, I don't know. Whether or not we would get a check, I don't know. I think we probably would get a check because I think it would have to be licensed. Basically, Sony is still paying a license on the Spider-Man stuff.
Right.
I mean, we get them with action figures and things like that. We made some decent money on Silver Sable. She's had an action figure in almost every permutation of a Spider-Man cartoon.
Yeah.
She's been in the video game. It's really cool. It's neat to have created some Spider-Man characters that have had not only some staying power, but some interest for other writers who had interest. Like the Mattis did some wonderful stuff with Puma. It's always neat when the characters resonate with other writers and stuff. Michelini did some great stuff even with Black Fox. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's always gratifying. It's always neat.
All right. Oh, and last one. That one just snuck under the door like Indiana Jones sliding under the wall here. The Hater shows up to take us home. How proud do you feel having been the first artist to put the new Warriors on the page after seeing what they have become?
Well, they've become a completely different animal. So I really can't say I've followed what they've become much. I would have liked to have seen this. I would like to see this pilot if it was indeed shot, because Tom Falco and I did come up with the New Warriors themselves and Night Thrasher, and Night Thrasher was going to be a part of this pilot, and Speedball was going to be in it. So I would have been curious to see that. Pride is not something that necessarily comes with creating these characters and then having them handled by other creators. You get used to it and you realize that we don't own anything; we just rent it while we're here. That kind of thing. So you get pretty philosophical about it. But as far as the original dynamic of the New Warriors and everything, that's something that I'm very gratified to have been a part of. And boy, when they handed them over to Fabian and Mark Bagley, oh my God, what a run of books that was. That was just a tool. They did an incredible job. So I was a big fan of the book. I didn't sit there every issue and go, yeah, I did that. It was neat that we were able to set up these characters that they brought to life and made whole flesh. It's really wonderful work with them. So.
I usually make it a habit of when I leave a book, I don't go back and look at the people who worked on the book after I did it. Like when they did 25 issues of Darkhawk after I left. I never looked at them. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to look at it. It was
that's the Falco's philosophy too. He never looks at anything after that. I mean, I'm too curious. I think I'm too much of a fanboy at heart. I mean, I even bought all the issues of as Guardians of the Galaxy because the 616 Kevin Masterson Thunderstrike was a part of it, just to see what they did with them. And I'm old enough and adult enough in this industry, versed enough in this industry that I'm not throwing things against the wall. I'm not getting all uptight about it. I mean, it is what it is. And if we ever got a crack at it again, if we ever got a chance to handle the character again, we could choose to ignore it or deal with it or fold it into what we were doing. Those were all choices to be made at the time, not before, that kind of thing. So, but it's always fascinating to see these characters out there living past your handling of them, and to see how other people are seeing them.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, really, it's a fascinating aspect of his business.
Hey, Mike, you wanna get ready to take us home?
Yeah. Where should people find you? I know you're on Facebook. Are you on Instagram? Are you on Twitter?
No.
Are you?
No, the only two places to find me are Facebook and CatskillComics.com. One word, CatskillComics.com. A young man named Scott Kress runs the website, and we sell any original art that I have, and I do my commissions through there. We do have a waiting list currently. So that's kind of mind-blowing and interesting and fascinating. But Scott's a good man and has a great reputation, and I'm very proud to be working with him.
Do you like doing commissions?
I love doing commissions. Not all commissions, but I'm always fascinated to see what kind of commissions I get. I guess apparently Hobgoblin and I are going to be joined at the hip until I die. Even though I didn't co-create him or anything, but I'm very associated with him. And Black Costume Spider-Man, and on and on and on. But every once in a while, more than every once in a while, you get one that you just like, oh, that's interesting. That'll be fun. I just did an Annihilus and Blastar.
Wow.
It was fun to pull out the reference on those guys and have some fun with that, that kind of thing. So, yeah, I really do enjoy it because, as I said, I just like to do superheroes now. So commissions is really, and I mean this in the most wonderful way. It's a way for me to monetize my 38-year career and to kind of live off the carcass of my career until such time as I no longer need sustenance or spaghetti.
And that was a Kirby character too, Carcass.
Carcass. Yeah.
From the Eternals.
The big guy, yeah.
The big red guy.
Yeah.
Which I hope is in the film, because if Carcass is big red guy's not in the film, come on.
I'm going to prejudge one thing, and that's whatever that big flat ship is, to do an Eternals trailer. And this is just for the trailer. I'm not going to prejudge the movie, but to do the Eternals trailer and to not have built three-dimensionally in a computer a Kirby ship is a wasted opportunity to me.
Maybe they thought it was from 2001. They got it confused. They're drawing.
That's the thing. That's what I'm saying. I mean, to have had a panoramic shot of that, like Kirby was doing, of those really cool ships coming in over the Aztec pyramids or something. My God, that would have blown the walls out of the theater. And why they didn't do that is just baffling to me.
Mm-hmm. All right. Hey, Ron, we've had a fantastic time talking to you
tonight. Man. Really,
Thank you so much.
I appreciate it, guys. And I'm always flattered to be asked. So it's been fun hanging out with you. Thanks.
Oh, thanks. Well, Ron, we're gonna close up the show. Hopefully you'll hang out with us and do our outro.
Okay.
So thanks everybody for joining us. We'll be back here next week with Cleopatra in Space's Mike Mayhack, who has a very fantastic cartoon on Peacock. It's on Hulu now. I'm very excited to talk to him as well. And Ron, the time just melted away. I don't know where the time went. So that's always great when the clock's spinning like an old Three Stooges short. So thank you so much. And guys, please don't forget to like and sub and get the alerts for the YouTube channel. We can't do this without your support and your sharing. You see, we bring you AAA diamond content every week. Where else are you going to see Ron Frenz kick it for 2 hours? I don't know.
Unless you stand outside his window. Hey, Ron, I got another question.
That's fantastic. So, all right, guys, we're gonna let everybody go pee. So, thanks so much for joining us. And you know what to do next, you guys. All right, Ron, let's do it. We're gonna wash those Kirby hands. Let's see let's see those Kirby hands. Oh, that's a good one. Oh, that's a perfect one, Ron. Thanks so much.
There you go.
All right, guys. See you next time.
Gentlemen.